Imagine being a child in a house that should feel safe. Yet every night it feels like the walls themselves are alive. That's how one Redditor described their childhood home. A place that looked ordinary from the outside, but had a terrifying presence within. They remembered how the house always seemed colder at night. The kind of chill that didn't come from broken heating or winter winds, but something deeper. It was as if the air carried whispers too faint to make out, yet heavy enough to send shivers down the spine. The strangest part was the footsteps. Always the footsteps. Long after everyone else had gone to sleep, they would hear the creak of the hallway floorboards, slow and deliberate, one step after another. At first, they thought it might be their parents, but every time they dared to peek out, the hallway was empty, stretching into a dark silence that made them retreat under the covers. One night stands out above all the rest. They had been tossing and turning, unable to sleep, when the footsteps began again. This time, they were closer, louder, each creak of the floorboards echoing inside their head. The sound stopped right outside the bedroom door. The silence was unbearable, like the house itself was holding its breath, heart pounding. They leaned forward and peeked through the small crack of the door. What they saw has haunted them ever since. Standing in the hallway was a tall, shadow-like figure. It had no face, no details, just the shape of something human that didn't quite belong to this world. Its presence felt heavy, suffocating, like the air had been stolen from the room. For a few seconds, the figure didn't move. It simply stood there, as if it knew it was being watched. Then, without warning, it dissolved into the air, leaving only silence behind. They slammed the door shut and hid under blankets, too terrified to move until morning. The next day, they told their parents what happened, but the response was the same as always. Just a dream, nothing more. But the Redditors swore it wasn't. Dreams don't make the floorboards creak. Dreams don't stare back at you through the crack of your door. From that night on, they never felt safe in that house again. Every corner, every shadow, every quiet moment carried the weight of that figure watching them. Even years later, after moving out, they still wake in the middle of the night, half expecting to hear those slow, deliberate footsteps returning, reminding them that some homes are never truly empty. Walking alone at night can already make the bravest person uneasy, but for one Redditor, that walk turned into the most terrifying experience of their life. They had just finished a late shift at work and were heading home through quiet, empty streets. The night air was still, and the sound of their own footsteps seemed louder than usual, echoing off the buildings. It was a kind of silence that presses down on you, where even the smallest noise feels unnatural. As they walked, they began to notice another sound. Faint at first, but undeniable. The rhythm of footsteps following just a little behind. At first, they tried to brush it off, telling themselves it was just someone else heading home the same way. But every time they slowed their pace, the footsteps slowed too. Every time they sped up, the sound behind them matched. Their heart began to race as adrenaline took over. They glanced over their shoulder but saw nothing but the faint glow of streetlights and empty sidewalks. Still, the footsteps remained, always just far enough back to keep them guessing. They tried to stay calm, convincing themselves it was their imagination, yet the dread inside their chest grew heavier with every step. The streets felt longer than usual, and the shadows stretched unnaturally wide, as if the night itself was working against them. Finally, they reached a corner near their home, a spot where they usually felt safe. But this time the fear didn't let go. They turned quickly, hoping to catch whoever was behind them in the act. But there was no one. The street was empty, the air completely still. Trying to shake off the fear, they rushed toward their front door, fumbling with their keys. Just as they slid the key into the lock, they felt it, a sudden shift in the air, like someone was standing right behind them, breathing down their neck. Every instinct screamed at them not to turn around. Somehow, they managed to push open the door and slam it shut behind them, chest heaving as if they had just outrun death itself. For a moment, they thought it was finally over. Then they saw it, carved into the wooden surface of the door. Words that hadn't been there before. Words etched deep as if by a knife. "I'll be back." The shock left them frozen. They knew it wasn't possible. No one had been close enough to do it. No sound had been made. And yet the message was right there in front of their eyes. That night, They barely slept, checking the locks over and over, staring at the door as if it might come alive. Even now, years later, they can still remember the sound of those phantom footsteps, always just behind them, always matching their pace, reminding them that sometimes the most terrifying monsters are not the ones we see, but the ones that stalk us quietly in the dark, waiting for the moment we let our guard down. The scariest thing about the modern world is that danger no longer needs to knock on your door. It can slip in quietly through the very devices meant to keep you connected. One Redditor shared a story that started out as nothing more than a strange email, but quickly became a nightmare that blurred the line between the digital and the real. It began late one night when they were scrolling through their inbox. Among the usual flood of spam and updates sat a message with no subject line from an address they didn't recognize. Curious, they opened it, only to find a single sentence. "I like the way your living room looks at night." At first, they laughed it off, assuming it was some kind of phishing attempt or joke. But then, as they read it again, a chill ran through them. How could anyone know what their living room looked like at night? Trying to ignore the unease, they deleted the email and went about their evening. But the next night, another message arrived. This one was more specific. "The red blanket on your couch makes the room look cozy." Their heart skipped a beat. They did have a red blanket draped across the couch, and it was visible only if you were inside their apartment. The fear crept in slowly at first, a whisper of doubt. But by the time the third email arrived, it had taken hold completely. This message said, "I saw you reading last night. You look so focused." Panic surged through them. They lived alone. The curtains were always drawn. No one should have been able to see inside. They did what most people would do. They changed their passwords, updated their antivirus, even bought a new phone, hoping the intrusion would stop. For a while, the inbox remained quiet, and they allowed themselves to believe it was over. But just as their guard began to lower, another email came through. This one was different. It included a photo. The image was blurry but unmistakable. It was them, sitting on their couch, illuminated by the soft glow of a lamp, reading the very book they had been holding the week before. Their blood turned to ice. Someone had been inside their home. Desperate, they moved to a new apartment, one with better locks, a top-floor unit, and reinforced windows. For weeks, everything felt normal again, as though the nightmare had finally been left behind. But then, late one night, a new email appeared. The subject line was blank as always, but the message sent their stomach into knots. It said, "Nice new curtains. Red suits the room." They stared at the email in disbelief. No one had been invited into their new apartment. No one knew where they had moved. Yet somehow, whoever or whatever it was had followed them. Sleep became impossible. Every creak of the floorboards, every shadow in the corner, every flicker of the computer screen felt like a threat. They taped over camera lenses on their devices, unplugged electronics, and even avoided going online altogether. But it didn't matter. The emails kept coming, each one a reminder that no matter how far they tried to run, someone was always watching. The horror wasn't in the messages themselves, but in the growing realization that their privacy was gone, their safety stripped away, and the intruder could reach them from anywhere at any time. In the end, the Redditor admitted they no longer knew if it was a person or something more sinister, only that the feeling of being hunted had become a permanent part of their life. Some monsters don't lurk in the shadows anymore. They hide behind the glow of a screen, patient, silent, and always watching. What makes some stories linger in our minds long after we finish hearing them is not what is revealed, but what is left behind. The uncertainty, the unanswered questions, the things that refuse to be explained. These are what truly haunt us. One Redditor recalled an experience that still keeps them awake, not because of what they saw, but because they still can't explain what happened. They were a teenager, staying up late in their room, scrolling through their phone. It was around 3 a.m. when they heard something faint, a knock, not on the front door, not on the walls, but directly on their bedroom window. At first, they thought they were imagining it, just a trick of a tired mind. But then it came again, 3 slow, deliberate taps on the glass. Their room was on the second floor. There was no ledge, no tree branches that could have brushed against a window, nothing that could explain the sound. Terrified but curious, they crept closer and pulled the curtain back just a few inches. Outside, the streetlight glowed weakly against the pavement, but the rest of the night was pitch black. Nothing moved. No figure stood there. Just darkness pressing against the glass. Trying to shake it off, they closed the curtain, crawled back into bed, and told themselves it was nothing. Minutes later, the tapping returned, this time louder, more insistent. As though whatever was outside wanted them to know it was there, they froze under the covers, too scared to look again. Eventually, the sound stopped, and exhaustion finally pulled them into an uneasy sleep. The next morning, sunlight streamed through the curtains, and for a moment, they almost convinced themselves it had all been a dream. But when they finally dared to look, their hearts sank. On the glass of the window were 3 perfect smudges, as though someone or something had pressed their fingertips against it. The prints were too high for anyone standing outside, unless they had been floating. Years have passed since that night, but the memory is as sharp as ever. The Redditor explained that the not knowing is what haunts them most. Was it a prank, a sleep-induced hallucination, or had something truly inhuman come to visit? They never found an answer. Each explanation leaves holes, and the mystery gnaws at the edges of their mind. That's the cruelty of the unknown. It doesn't go away. It settles into you, reminding you that sometimes there is no answer, no neat way to explain the unexplainable. And it's not just them. Many others share similar experiences. Footsteps that stop when you turn around, whispers that vanish when you strain to hear, shadows that disappear as soon as you focus on them. Each moment leaves behind the same chilling truth. We don't always get answers. The fear isn't in the thing itself, but in the fact that it refuses to be understood. That's what makes these stories timeless. When something can't be explained, it becomes larger than life, a question that follows you everywhere. What was outside that window? Who carved those words into the door? How did someone send that photo? The lack of closure keeps the story alive, whispering in the back of your mind every time a house creaks or the night grows too quiet. Because deep down, you know that sometimes the scariest monsters aren't the ones you see, but the ones you can never prove were there at all. If this story kept you awake tonight, don't keep the fear to yourself. Share it. Hit the like button. Subscribe to Dark Verse, and join me in the shadows for more tales that refuse to let you sleep. And tell me in the comments, what's the scariest thing you've ever experienced?